Hey there everyone, I'm Lexi Eve. Do without wilt shall be the whole of the law. Welcome to today's lecture. It's another one on Liber ABA, Magick Book 4, and this is from Part 2, Chapter 4, the Scourge, the Dagger, and the Chain. So let's begin. In Part 2 of Magick Book 4, there are only 2 chapters that are about more than one item, and those are this, Chapter 4, and also Chapter 16, the magic fire, with considerations of the thurible, the charcoal, and the incense. But the latter has clear associations amongst the group that the chapter covers. So, this grouping of 3, about the Scourge, Dagger, and Chain, seemingly unrelated magical weapons, should be duly noted as important. And I ask, what is the glue which binds them together? Well, the obvious answer is given by Crowley right at the beginning of the chapter, quote, "The scourge, the dagger, and the chain represent the 3 alchemical principles of sulfur, mercury, and salt." End quote. A paragraph later, Crowley tells us that they also relate to the 3 gunas, but what is not mentioned at all is that sulfur, and mercury correspond directly with Bina, Chakma, and Kether respectively. Therefore, to break these 3 items apart, in a sense, is impossible, for everything above the abyss is in a state of union unlike anything physically below the abyss. As I will also cover towards the end of the chapter, these weapons also correspond with Gabora in 777, but if each chapter spoke on all items of a specific path, there would be many chapters that were about more than one item, which is not the case. Therefore, I know that the subtle associations of the supernal correspondence is the reason these weapons are written about together. What then may go completely overlooked here is the occult maxim thrown around daily by every magician without proper application in over 93% of all usages, that being as above, so below. Of course, alchemical principles, especially the main 3 which correspond with the Hermetic elements, would be aptly placed under this maxim. But I pointed out that these 3 weapons fit perfectly on the tree below the abyss in Gabora and above in the supernal triad, because I want to make clear that in every case of the occult soever, one should scrutinize their subject at hand under the philosophy of the Emerald Tablet. But I will come back to this briefly in a moment. Only because Crowley tangents in this chapter upon the blasphemy of all things holy, that is, Christian philosophy, I will paraphrase what he is saying. The 3 gunas in relation to these weapons are less apt in a Hindu context because he says that school is extremely focused upon the absolute. This is problematic as anything other than the absolute becomes bad, and here we arrive at a philosophical problem that's so clusterfucked that even the great Thomas Aquinas couldn't figure out why it is that God made evil. Crowley then talks about a quote by St. Paul saying that where evil abounds, grace does so even more. To which Crowley responds that perhaps we should do evil for the reception of grace. And maybe then that is why God made the devil in his sick and twisted 7 days of creation. And now that we are completely off track, let's talk about the magical weapons of this chapter and their relation to the supernal triad, the gunas, and the elements. I'll quote Crowley and then I'll add on to what he has given us. To begin with the weapons, quote, "The scourge is sulfur. Its application excites our sluggish natures, and it may further be used as an instrument of correction to castigate rebellious volitions. It is applied to the nefesh, the animal soul, the natural desires." End quote. Now my notes on this. The scourge as the alchemical sulfur corresponds with Chakma. The scourge is held by the Egyptian god Osiris. Also, Christians, primarily, have used the scourge to atone for sin, either their own or of others / the world. Pain self-induced, in a sense, does pay a karmic debt, if only a small amount, but, in my opinion, would not pay the karma of another person. In fact, while on the subject, I just want to note that I find it particularly rude to pray for anyone without their consent. Would you have someone you don't know cast the spell upon you because they thought it was in your best interest? No? Really? Well, to every Christian out there, do not conjure spoken spells in the form of prayer without consent, because it is a form of magic, and you are not only harming yourself, but others by so doing. How do you know what is best for someone? Maybe they need to mess things up in order to learn to do better the next time. Lastly, on the Scourge, I have used it twice in ritual that were actually important. Once I performed the Feast of a Dragon as part of a group, and that was for the peak of Scorpio season a few years back, and to prepare the altar steps, I had to scourge them. Then again in a solitary adaptation of Liber 66 Stelle Rubae. In the latter ritual, I used it to beat my nefesh into submission by literally striking my back with my own personal magical scourge. This altered my state of consciousness by bringing me into a submissive state of arousal to evoke Kundalini. Next up, quote, the dagger is Mercury. It is used to calm too great heat by the letting of blood. And it is this weapon which is plunged into the side or heart of the magician to fill the holy cup. Those faculties which come between the appetites and the reason are thus dealt with, end quote. My notes on the dagger as Mercury corresponds with Keter and Sattvas. As Rajas is fierce and Tamas sluggish, Sattvas is equable. Thus, between Bina and Chachma is a fitting place for the dagger. That's why I believe he puts it in the middle of the title, in between the scourge and the chain. Not only that, but like the sword, the larger counterpart of the dagger, it is of an airy nature. Where better to place such a magical weapon than upon the middle pillar? That Crowley says of the sword in its chapter that as man prides his mind so, that is why the sword is the magician's largest weapon. Because of his pride, he should make the dagger suffice his needs. Because of this, I personally like the idea of the dagger being placed with the crown. Quote, the chain is salt. It serves to bind the wandering thoughts, and for this reason is placed about the neck of the magician where Dot is situated, end quote. In the description of the magical chain, it says that it has 333 links, which links it presumably to Karanza. Quote, the chain is salt, it serves to bind the wandering thoughts, and for this reason is placed about the neck of the magician, where Dot is situated. These are the conclusions that I have reasoned out as to why the chain is worn around the neck. The Vishuddha chakra is at the throat center. Part of being a magician is to keep silence and to create as they speak. The chain should bind them to this. That the abyss on the tree is also at the throat center, I take it to mean that the chain of the magician has the ability to bind the demon that dwelleth therein, 333. Lastly, and actually least in this case, one can add magical talismans in the form of pendants to the chain to reinforce whatever magical properties they need at that time. In 777, these three weapons correspond with Gabora. This is the sphere of Mars, war, aggressive action, and a sphere of potent magic. These weapons all interact with the magician in a physical way unlike any other. They all inflict pain. The scourge to beat the flesh into submission, the dagger to pierce the heart and fill the grail of the sacred whore with their blood, i.e., dissolve into union with the all, and the chain binds the throat, choking away wrong speech, which, as I've stated, is very important for the magician because they create as they speak. Also, we shall see in a second that these are very physically interactive weapons. The glass vial of the holy oil reflects what they do to the magician. Let me quote and explain. Crowley ends this chapter by writing, quote, it is now evident why these weapons are grouped around the phial of clear crystal in which is kept the holy oil. The scourge keeps the aspiration keen, the dagger expresses the determination to sacrifice all, and the chain restricts any wandering, end quote. This left me with a misunderstanding, and I had to reread this a few times and ask someone close to me a few questions to really get full understanding about why these three particular weapons are placed specifically around the holy oil in a crystal phial. The answer came to me in this way. The three gunas are in motion, like the wheel of samsara, each acting to dominate for as long as it may, only to be overtaken by the next one, and so on. The holy oil, as we shall learn about in the next chapter, represents the magician's aspiration. Holy oil is not properly listed as a magical weapon in 777 nor 776.5, but personally, I would place it on path 31 bis for spirit. By placing these items, which again represent the three gunas, around the holy oil, it is like they are reflected in the spirit, and by the light and images that are cast into the glass vial, the reflection is cast back outward into the surroundings. Note that glass is very important in this context. Glass, like a mirror, reflects and is symbolic of the mind. But two more important things are to be noted. Glass is clear and represents clarity of foresight. Also, it is man-made, artificial, and can be produced through the act of creating it. All of this taken together is very symbolic of how a magician chooses their actions, how those experiences affect the magician, and thence, as a result of such experiences, how the magician was changed is how they will interact with the world. In a sense, what goes into one's being is likely to be what they put out. If one fights doing their will, their actions will be either insane or corrupted. If they embrace their true nature through self-discovery, they will find they are in harmony with the universe. But note that man is in control of their destiny. They must take charge at every moment of their life, and by will alone, choose to flow with the current and not fight it. So that's basically my lecture on this chapter, the Scourge, the Dagger, and the Chain. So I'm going to end right here. And love is the law, love under will. I hope to see you all in the next one later on.